Live from Los Angeles tonight, the next revolution will be televised. As the Vice President walks out of a football game over player protests, we break down the debate. And tonight, Swamp Watch takes on the NFL, ripping off taxpayers, ripping off fans, shocking hypocrisy. We expose Roger Goodell and football's elitist bosses. Plus, after Vegas, it's the same old gun debate. But is it just elitism by another name? And the artificial intelligence revolution. Will robots really take your job? One of the world's top tech thinkers is here to tell us. And the populist revolution gathers pace around the world. With Spain on the brink of breakup, what's the lesson for big government here in America? Breaking tonight, the Vice President of the United States walks out on the NFL. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Well, another Sunday, another clash between pro-football players and the Trump administration. Vice President Mike Pence abruptly left today's Colts-49ers game in Indianapolis when several 49ers players took a knee during the national anthem. Honestly, good for Mike Pence. As I said here last week, there's no question that there are important reasons to be concerned about and to protest against racial injustice in America. But can we just keep our unifying national symbols out of it? Or I guess we should say symbols that are supposed to be unifying, like our flag and our anthem. The drip, drip, drip of all this, the politicization of absolutely everything, it really undermines a nation's culture. And that's not just some vague thing that has no impact in the real world. It does have an impact. It affects our ability to come together to solve real problems, whether that's fighting terrorism, fighting crime, or fighting for better jobs and higher incomes. All of that is so much easier if we can have a respectful conversation as Americans who may disagree. And it's that much harder if the symbols of America become the symbols of division instead of unity. There's a direct connection between the NFL protests and nothing getting done in Washington. It's all part of the same destructive polarization. So you know what this is about, don't you? This whole thing, this NFL thing? It's not about race. It's not about criminal justice. It's not about anything specific anymore. It's about something way bigger and, frankly, way more harmful. It's like so much else in America these days. It's about elitism. It's about the elite looking down their snooty noses at working Americans and sneering at them. Look at them with their flags and their patriotism and their religion and their country music and, yes, their guns. We'll get to that later in the show. Look at those, well, I think the word we're searching for is deplorables. That's what those NFL players and the billionaire bosses who indulge them are really saying. Later in the show tonight, we'll expose their corruption and hypocrisy in Swamp Watch. But for now, let's make one more plea to the disdainful elites in football, in the media, in Silicon Valley, in Hollywood and Wall Street and Washington, D.C., in the Democratic Party, but in the Republican establishment too, for the sake of our country's future, for the sake of fairness and justice for working Americans. Could you stop being so bigoted, so narrow-minded, so unbelievably condescending towards the half of the country that doesn't live like you? That is the next revolution we need. Now, let's bring in our panel to debate these matters. President of the People's House Project, Crystal Ball. Editor and publisher of the online political journal American Greatness, Chris Buskirk. And Rasmussen Report's political analyst, Amy Holmes. Amy, let's just start with what happened today. What do you think of the Vice President walking out today? Right thing to do or wrong thing to do?
I agree with you, Steve. I think it was the right thing to do, particularly when we know his boss's view of the situation. I don't think that the Vice President really had a choice. But getting back to your monologue and some of the points you made, and I agree that there is this snootiness and sneering and snobbery at symbols of American patriotism. And it makes me so sad, and even particularly in the NFL context, that people don't remember that one of the most beautiful, heart-wrenching, tear-jerking renditions of the national anthem was sung by Whitney Houston at the Super Bowl in 1991. And it was a rallying moment, and a moment for Americans to have America's black princess bringing us together. And we seem to have forgotten that. I mean, a lot of these players probably weren't even born when she sang the national anthem. But I think we need to get back to that.
Well, I think I very much agree with that. But Crystal, just before we figure out how to get back to it, what changed? What do you think lies behind this very clear cultural change that's gone on?
Well, one thing I would say, I mean, I disagree with your interpretation of what the players are doing themselves in kneeling during the national anthem. I mean, let's be clear, this was an intentionally provocative act. But I actually look at things quite differently. So in the same way that for many people who are struggling in America, who feel looked down upon, who see their communities crumbling, struggling with drug addiction and houses that are decaying and no opportunity for themselves and their children, in the same way that a vote for President Trump was in a lot of ways a cry for help, I see that in this same intentionally provocative gesture from these NFL players who are saying, you know, the root of this was look at my community, look at the fact that we are dying and we are struggling and we can't get anyone to pay attention and really address the problem. So I see a lot more in common between the Trump supporter and the NFL player than the division that is portrayed.
Hang on, I just want to, let's just get our terms right. I think certainly we're going to show you later on in this show, maybe not the player, but certainly the people that the player might be speaking for. I mean, the players themselves are not suffering from poor housing and
but let's remember where many of them came from,
so
right? And these are their communities and their families.
Right, so just to that point then, given that, and I've acknowledged that here many times. Every time we've talked about this, I've made a very similar point that there are real injustices that have gone on for a long time.
Right.
But isn't there a better place and way to make the protest that would actually bring more people together to actually solve the problems?
It's certainly possible. As I said, this is an intentionally provocative act. I think that good people can disagree whether this is the right way to go to call attention to this problem. But the bottom line is that other methods that have been used haven't solved the problem. The other thing I would say, and I would just point out here, is that I think the vice president also made a very political statement here, right? He went to this game intentionally, and he knew what he was doing, and this was likely something that he intended in advance. So the NFL players aren't the only ones making a political point on the field today.
So, Chris, your journal, American Greatness, I think that the name speaks for itself. There's a sort of patriotism underlying all of that. When you see all this going on, what's your reaction?
You know, my reaction is, well, I guess I go back to something that I saw the Dallas Cowboys do 2 weeks ago. Jerry Jones went out there with his players. They stood for the anthem, but before that, they locked their arms and they knelt. And after the game, they asked him, "Well, Jerry, why did you guys do that?" He said, "Well, we wanted to be together, and we wanted to show ourselves as unified and do something together that showed a community spirit." I thought, Jerry, you don't have a sense of self-reference or self-knowledge or irony, do you? Because that's what the anthem is. That is why we all stand for the anthem, put our hand over our hearts. That is the sense of community. That is the sense of unity. So you denigrated the country and then tried to create some other sense of community that didn't need to be created in the first place.
Let's not forget, though, what sparked this latest expanded wave, which was the President of the United States calling black athletes who were kneeling SOBs. So I think it makes sense that Jerry Jones felt that his players were under attack and that there was a need to show a level of unity.
But there's another side to that. That when the kneeling started with Mr. Kaepernick, there were actually very few players that were kneeling, and we only saw this wave as a reaction to President Trump. So I'm not sure,
SOBs.
Right, which I thought was inappropriate, and he should not have done that. I disagreed with that. But I'm not sure that the current protests and deliberate acts of provocation, as you call them, actually have very much to do with the criminal justice problem, black males in particular being targeted by cops. It seems to be a big middle finger to the President of the United States and the 63 million people who voted for him.
I think that's right, and that's what's so sad about it. But I mean, do any of you see any prospect for moving on? Are we stuck with this forever?
Well, the NFL is going to have something to say about this, and we're seeing that ratings are going down. At Rasmussen Reports, we find that 34% of adult Americans say they are less likely to follow football because of these protests.
That's a big number.
So when it hits the NFL in the pocketbook, in the wallet, I think you're going to see some changes.
But
this is totally disunifying. I mean, if the NFL could have come up with a way to try and ruin their business and ruin the cause that they were supposedly trying to stand up for, they did it. I think that they have popped what I call the sports bubble, and something that I wrote a week or so ago. The bloom is off the rose here. People are starting to see these athletes for who they are.
Wait till you see what's coming up later in the show. We're going to add to that. And I'm very excited about this. Sorry, we're going to have to pause it there for a second. Because I think what we're going to go to next is some of the social media comments that have come in from the from the audience. Are we going to do that later? I'm sorry, I got that in the wrong order, because on the heels of the Vice President's abrupt exit from today's game, we're going to, as I was just mentioning, throw a flag on the swampiness of the NFL. You won't believe the shady dealings of off the gridiron. It's a swamp watch you can't miss tonight. Plus, what does the artificial intelligence revolution mean to you and other working Americans? And is this one revolution that we want to stop? But next, the horrible tragedy in Las Vegas has given the elites a license to lecture. The sad state of the gun debate is next. We're back in a moment. Last Sunday, as I always do, I got home and started looking at your tweets about the show and replying as usual. And then I noticed Mandalay Bay on the side of the screen, and I started to see some of those early videos with that horrific noise of gunfire. I went to bed shocked, but still with no idea of the scale of what had happened. Of course, during the week, we've all been learning more, not just about the crime and the criminal, but the victims and the heroes of all kinds who helped save lives. It's been an incredibly emotional week. But there is one emotion that I really didn't need, and that was anger at our politicians. And to be honest, that started right away on Monday morning when I saw Hillary Clinton tweeting about taking on the NRA. And then later that day, when Democrat Congressman and would-be presidential candidate Seth Moulton staged some pathetic, self-indulgent, hateful, divisive protest, refusing to observe a minute's silence for the victims. If the elites want to know why they're not getting anywhere with their gun control message, look no further than the attitude of people like Clinton and Moulton. This quote from Dan Henninger in the Wall Street Journal this week summed it up for me. Here it is. Anyone who disagrees with the absolutist liberal default position on banning guns is deplorable. This may be among the reasons the Democrats lost the 2016 election, have lost control of most state governments, and could lose Senate seats next year. The NRA and pro-gun sentiment doesn't defeat them. What defeats them is that their compulsive moral condescension impedes their ability to see the country clearly. Crystal, like, whatever your views on the gun issue, let's just assume, and I don't know your views, but let's just assume that you're an
I don't want to ban guns,
right?
But I
you're
do think
an advocate for gun control.
Such things are a good idea.
Don't you think that this kind of immediate response, this kind of immediate aggressive, again, it's this frankly elitist response, not understanding half the country, it doesn't help their argument. Doesn't help if that's what you want. It doesn't help your argument.
Here's what I would say. I think it's natural after a crisis like that to immediately go to what can we do? And I mean, in terms of the world, we are the worst in terms of mass shootings, and one happens on average every day. So if you're not going to talk about it the day of a mass shooting, you're not going to have much time to talk about it. But to your point, I think Democrats have no credibility with rural voters. Mm-hmm. And so even though when you look at the polling and you see 97% support universal background checks and other sort of common sense measures that Democrats support, because there is condescension coming from parts of the Democratic Party, there's no trust from rural voters to say, you're not going to go too far, right? And that this talk about guns isn't an attack on me. It really is just an attempt to solve a problem. There's no trust there. So one quick example, Joe Manchin, Senator of West Virginia, Democrat, who pushed for the Manchin to me gun control legislation. Well, he's still the most popular Democrat, the most popular politician in the state of West Virginia because he has credibility with rural voters. So they didn't see that as an attack on their culture. They thought, this is somebody trying to solve a problem. So I think there's a credibility problem for Democrats that is exacerbated by some of the comments that Hillary Clinton made as an example.
And she went straight to, I mean, look, almost at the same time, I think President Obama, I don't know if we have it, he had a completely different and frankly more graceful response. Michelle and I praying for the victims in Las Vegas. Our thoughts are with them and their families and everyone enduring another senseless tragedy. He makes the point that it's another senseless, but it's just the way of going about it. So I just wanted to get Chris in here. What's your, I mean, it's just, again, not so much on the actual debate itself, but the way this conversation is getting replayed over and over again.
No, over and over again. I thought President Obama's tweet was spot on. That was about the best thing you could possibly say, and it was totally appropriate. And then if you compare it side by side to what Hillary Hillary Clinton said. She said, can't we just put up politics aside and oppose the NRA?
Right.
Yeah, okay, this goes to exactly what you were talking about, Steve. If you don't subscribe to the left-wing progressive catechism, you're just an unperson. Then we don't. That's not political. You're just wrong, and we have the right to talk past you. And that was what I think Hillary Clinton was demonstrating with that tweet, and that's what we saw from some of these other congressmen and people who want to jump out there and immediately say, aha, people dead, I can score political points about this. And that turns people off, as it should.
I just want,
Sorry, we haven't got too long.
I think there's a genuine desire to solve a problem here, that it's not just politics,
no,
but I
but you're never going to get there.
The problem is that
you're never going to get there with that kind of
and you're not going to get there
attitude.
when the Democratic candidate for president talks about people clinging to their guns and their Bible and not liking people who don't look like them, which we remember President Obama said back in 2008.
And to be fair, by the way, he has gone back and said he really regrets having said that.
But that was basically the mask slipping.
Yeah.
And that's when the public says, oh, so that's what you really think about us. And when Hillary Clinton tweets something, the part of the reason she doesn't have credibility is because she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
So when she says, if only, can you imagine if there had been a silencer? Well, as people actually know about guns started
but
quickly
I think, Amy, you got the real.
we've
got to move on, I'm afraid. But I think you got to the heart of it, where the bigger point here, which is not about silencers or bump stocks or whatever, which is like this point about.
So she's out of touch.
It revealed what we really think of you, and I think that's what people perceive in this whole debate, and that's why it never moves forward. That's what I think. Anyway, we'll probably be back to that another time. But right away on this show tonight, Swamp Watch will expose the secrets of the National Football League. Did you know that your tax dollars are paying for their billion-dollar stadiums? But next, does the artificial intelligence revolution mean massive unemployment and income inequality for human workers in the future? Could a robot replace you? We'll be joined by Silicon Valley's leading intellectual to discuss what every American worker needs to know. Next. Welcome back, everyone. We've talked about the NFL protests, we've talked about guns, and here is another side to elitism in America, the economic side. In a piece this week, former Reagan speechwriter Peggy Noonan brilliantly captured why working Americans feel abandoned by the elites. Here's a quote from it. Our country's real overlords are in Silicon Valley and appear to be moral Martians who operate on some weird new postmodern ethical wavelength. And they'll be the ones programming the robots that'll soon take all the jobs. Maybe the robots will all look like Mark Zuckerberg, like those eyeless busts of Roman emperors. Our leaders don't even think about this technological revolution. They're too busy with transgender rights. In a moment, one of the world's top thinkers on technology and its impact on society joins us to talk jobs and artificial intelligence. But first, here's Anita Vogel with an overview of the debate.
It's currently clear and 73 degrees in Los Angeles.
We're used to asking our phone for the forecast or directions to where we're going. And if you want the news, just ask Alexa.
Tropical storm Nate, still growing.
How is it happening? It's something called artificial intelligence, AI for short, and it's already a part of our everyday lives.
Humans have created it. Right, so it's artificial in that sense. It's non-biologic. It's autonomous. That's the intelligence part. Is it can do things on its own. It can make its own decisions.
AI expert William Welser says with more and more algorithms to work with, AI just keeps getting smarter.
Oftentimes humans, we don't know it. So we maybe think that we're dealing with another human, and in fact we're dealing with a machine.
AI is a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization.
Tech giants like Elon Musk predict gloom and doom, with robots replacing factory workers and self-driving cars replacing human drivers, resulting in widespread unemployment.
According to a brand new Pew Research poll, nearly 2/3 of Americans expect to struggle to find work in a world that could be filled with robots. But surprisingly, only 30% believe their own job is at risk.
When asked what jobs people believe are most at risk, fast food and insurance workers top the list. Just last week, the Los Angeles Economic Development Council held a forum on how to train employers and employees to adapt to a new world.
Artificial intelligence will not manage itself, will not serve itself. Humans will still be needed to program, to create programs, to repair, to manage, to protect these systems.
And at the University of Southern California, a new institute to study artificial intelligence has students delving into the good it can do to address issues like security, health, and homelessness.
In Los Angeles, with the homeless shelters here, we are running AI algorithms in order to spread information about HIV by figuring out who are the right peer leaders, the right messengers to spread information more quickly.
Still, the debate over the pros and cons of AI will continue. Experts in the field say with so many big issues facing our world, why wouldn't we just ask a robot for help?
Clearly, we haven't solved these problems as human beings. Perhaps AI can help us in solving these problems.
For the next revolution, Anita Vogel, Fox News.
Thanks, Anita. And we're joined now by Tim O'Reilly, the founder of O'Reilly Media and author of WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us, which, by the way, is a brilliant book about everything to do with technology. There's so much to talk about, Tim, from your book, but this particular question of AI and the economy and jobs, I'd love to focus on that. There's this story out there, the robots are coming, they're going to destroy jobs on a scale we haven't seen. What's your take?
I'm really sick and tired of hearing that the robots are going to take our jobs. They're only going to do that if that's what we tell them to do. And a lot of what we have to think about is, how are we telling them that? Why are we telling them that? And what do we do about it?
So let's just take some of those examples, some of the examples of manufacturing jobs that people worry will be displaced. What's the argument there? How can we tell the robots to operate in a way that doesn't destroy those jobs?
The thing we've got wrong about robots is we think of this object as the robot. The robot is the system, and we are actually living inside the future AI. It's the strongest face of it is not actually sites like Google and Facebook. It's our financial markets. What you have to understand, these are all vast digital systems that actually shape human society. And we see it with Facebook. We understand that Facebook was saying, well, we're going to give you content that's more engaging. They didn't mean to create hyperpartisanship and fake news, but the algorithms were gamed. Our financial markets are just like that. We came up with this idea that the thing to optimize for is stock price. And we didn't realize that that meant get rid of people. They're a cost to be eliminated.
So how do you change that? What are some of the things that you would like to see change going in the future?
I think there are a lot of policy interventions, but I think the first thing we have to realize is that we believe in the divine right of capital today as we once believed in the divine right of kings. And we have to stop believing that. Just like...
By capital, you mean the kind of shareholders, the owners of businesses, rather than the workers?
That's right. We believe that all of the fruits of productivity belong to the owners of companies, and that they don't need to be shared by society, that they don't need to be shared by by the workers. And so therefore get rid of the workers.
And do you think that's a belief, or do you think that's an accidental byproduct of the way technology has changed the economy?
Well, you have to understand that look around. I always think of this great quote from Larry Summers, where he refuted the efficient market hypothesis by saying, there are idiots, look around.
Right.
And I say, look, when we say...
Idiots on Wall Street, just like there are everywhere else.
Right.
Right.
There is work to be done. Look around. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it about the economic system and the political system we've created that keeps us from doing the work of making a better society? And we have to understand that all of these systems, we ultimately bake in these instructions. And we don't quite understand what we're asking for.
So just to sort of finish that point before I bring in the panel, are you arguing that really the point about the way to make sure that these technological advances benefit everyone and not just the rich is actually not so much to do with the technology, it's to do with the fundamentals of the way we organize capitalism and and politics? Okay. That's a very deep point, which I agree. By the way, I read something just today, which, and Crystal, I want you to jump in on this, because last time we were around this table.
Yes.
You missed it, but we had this passionate debate about AI and jobs, and that's why I particularly wanted to bring you together with Tim. But just something today, a data point, which was that I think since 1972, the average American wage in those 44 years has fallen by 2% in real terms. Amazing.
It's stunning. And, you know, we talk about, the technology of the future, it's going to displace workers. It's already happening. You know, I'm close with Congressman Tim Ryan, who represents Youngstown, Ohio. Used to be a great steel town, still a great town. And the steel mills left. One of the largest ones had 20,000 workers there, middle-class jobs, union jobs. And at great expense to taxpayers and using political capital, they brought a steel mill, billion-dollar steel mill, back to this same site, making more steel than they ever did, but instead of 20,000 workers, now it's 400, right? So this reality is here. And I think what is so interesting, what Tim's saying, is that you have to make sure that in this future, which can be amazing because working in a steel mill is a very dignified job, but that is a hard job. Working in a coal mine, very dignified job. No coal miner wants to send his son into the mines. So it can be great if you have more leisure, if you don't have to do those dangerous and dirty jobs. But we have to make sure that it's not only this small crust of people who is benefiting from those technological innovations.
So, Chris, I think that you know, like I sort of broadly put you on the side of the political argument that sort of gets and appreciates the kind of the particular Donald Trump contribution to this argument to elevate the position of working people who've been affected. What's your take?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, look, technology is coming. Technology has been displacing workers since somebody invented the lever or the wheel, and that's fine. And in fact, we want to encourage that. We want to innovate. We need to innovate, or China will eclipse us as a world economic and political and military power. So that's necessary. The question is, what do we do? And the first thing we have to do is say, who's we? And for Americans, that means the United States, and that means what does the American government do? And that means, on the one hand, we need to make sure that we continue to innovate technologically, but on the other hand, we need to set up policies that make sure that we are looking to develop a community and a strong middle class that encourages social mobility. That is absolutely
Tim,
essential.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that that's not going to happen without some pretty fundamental assault on the whole structure of the way we organize the economy.
One of the things I struggle with, and this goes really to the heart of you know, the subject of this show. We have a set of tired old prescriptions for how we're going to deal with this. We need taxes to be lower. Well, I look at that and I say, well, that's actually just feeding the problem, because in fact all of the proceeds go to the people who are gaining already from the system as it is. The Democrats say, well, we need to lower taxes. And I go, no, actually we need to understand what to tax. What are the things, you know, this is a concept they call Pigovian taxes, which are you tax the negative externalities.
Yeah,
and the negative
is not good.
But I have to say, I'm a bit confused. It seems to me that your argument is with Adam Smith and the invisible hand and the system, being the capitalist system that does drive innovation, lowering costs, lowering labor costs. And I guess I'm a bit confused. It seems like jobs have been lost by automation. You just have to walk into a CVS when you have to ring up your own things and there isn't a cashier there anymore.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because there's some really interesting work on this subject by Michael Mandel of the Progressive Policy Institute. Turns out there have been more jobs created in warehousing and delivery in the past few decades than are lost in retail. And those jobs actually pay better. And it's interesting. I have this amazing experience at Amazon, just understanding how many more people they're hiring. Because you know what they're telling their robots to do? You know, they put 45,000 robots into their warehouses, and they added 250,000 people. Wow. Because they said, we're going to use those robots to do more. We're going to try to deliver faster. They didn't say we're going to just use those robots to cut costs. And that goes back to this central idea that we're giving our economy the wrong instructions when we say cut costs, optimize for capital, ignore people.
I think this is the central debate in the economy, which is who benefits from the big changes that are happening. I'm sorry, we've run out of time today. Thank you so much, Tim. Really, really appreciate it. And your book, which everyone should get. Honestly, it's a brilliant book.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Coming up next, football is America's favorite sport, but when the game ends and the lights in the stadiums go dark, the swampy nature of the NFL comes out to play. We expose their secrets next. Another Sunday, another bunch of pro football players kneeling during the national anthem. Well, we thought it was about time the NFL got the Swamp Watch treatment. And sure enough, it turns out that the grass those players are kneeling on is actually a swamp full of lying lobbyists, puppet politicians and taxpayer dollars subsidizing brazen billionaires. The National Football League is tonight's Swamp Watch. President Trump's call for NFL owners to fire players protesting our flag and anthem was far from his first dust-up with the league. He even bid to own teams in the past, and why wouldn't he? Owning a pro football team is a total cash cow, especially when you can send a bill for your biggest expense to taxpayers who struggle to afford a seat, even in the nosebleed section where they pay more than $10 for a beer. Shockingly, one study found that 70% of the capital cost of NFL stadiums has been paid not by owners, but taxpayers. Step forward Seattle Seahawks owner Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft along with Bill Gates, one of the world's richest men. He got Washington state residents to pay $390 million of the $560 million cost for his stadium. I guess that's why he's one of the world's richest men. He gets taxpayers to subsidize his hobbies. Just like Minnesota Vikings owner Zygmunt Wilf, the state legislature handed over $506 million from taxpayers towards his new stadium, even though the state was facing a $1 billion budget deficit. Then there's New Orleans, which has one of the country's highest poverty rates. But that didn't stop Saints owner Tom Benson from taking a cool billion, that's right, $1 billion in taxpayer money to build Mercedes-Benz Stadium. These subsidies dwarf the rental fees that teams pay and are basically just gifts to owners. So let's get this straight. We help pay for billionaires' fancy stadiums, and then they keep almost all the profits from tickets, parking, beer, and hot dogs. They charge an average of $85 for a non-premium seat. You can forget about a pricey premium seat, and another $30 for parking. Want to take your family of 4 to watch the Cowboys play the Packers? You're looking at what, maybe $450. Good luck with that when half of American workers earn less than $850 a week, especially after the state pilfers your taxes to help out poor billionaire owners with their expenses. And it's not just construction costs your tax dollars go to. Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, who likes to portray himself as a frugal, cost-cutting conservative, sends the New Orleans Saints $6 million a year in so-called inducement payments, just to convince the team not to move. I'm sure you'd like an inducement payment to literally do nothing. In fact, politicians are so generous with your money that the Saints are one of 12 teams that have actually turned a profit on stadium subsidies alone. Yes, they received more money than it cost to build their facilities. I know, how the hell does that work? Only in the public sector. But it gets worse. Until just 2 years ago, the NFL was considered to be a non-profit, meaning it did not have to pay taxes on its massive earnings. This, while League Commissioner Roger Goodell was earning a cool $40 million a year, making him the highest paid non-profit executive in the country. Finally, after bad publicity, the league gave up that designation, but only after saving around $109 million in taxes over a 10-year period, a tax burden that was shifted onto you. Now, a large portion of the league's revenue comes from selling broadcast rights for a total of $54 billion. To negotiate as one entity on behalf of 32 teams, the federal government gives the NFL an antitrust waiver, protecting it from the type of lawsuits that Microsoft faced in the 90s. Being a legal monopoly has allowed the league to cut a lucrative deal with DirecTV. The only way you can watch every game is by forking out a hefty $70 a month. No wonder that some of the NFL's critics are calling on the government to revoke the league's antitrust exemption. They're able to keep their sweetheart treatment, though, because the NFL spends nearly twice as much on lobbying as the other 3 sports leagues combined. And they're the only sports league with a full-time lobbying operation in the Washington, D.C. swamp. They hired Joe Biden's former senior attorney, Cynthia Hogan, as their top lobbyist and set up shop in a new office 6 blocks from the White House. They share space with the league's powerful swampy law firm, Covington and Burling. Yes, them again, who you might remember from a previous Swamp Watch for their connections to Eric Holder and his soft stance on white-collar crime. But all that lobbying can't help the public relations crisis the NFL is now facing. When players kneel and supposedly protest criminal justice, don't forget that a disturbing number of them are criminals themselves. The website NFLarrest.com tracks all their run-ins with the law, at least those we know about. Since 2000, there have been at least 218 arrests of NFL players for drunk driving, 100 for drugs, 98 for domestic violence, and 74 for assault. In fact, Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones has had so much trouble with his players' crimes that he's hired an ex-cop called David Wells as the team's fixer to make their arrest problems quickly, go away. And according to Wells, the troubling stats are lowballed. He said, for every incident that generates a negative headline, 10 are handled without the public's knowledge. How reassuring. Even after the horrible Ray Rice domestic violence assault, pro football is still prioritizing victories over the victims of their players' bad behavior. During this year's draft, at least half a dozen players who've been accused of physical or sexual assault were welcomed into the league with open arms. That includes Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver D.D. Westbrook, who was twice arrested on domestic violence charges. So, although Donald Trump never managed to buy an NFL team, with the league experiencing a public relations crisis, more focus on its swampy ways, and now a ratings plummet, it may well be the president who has the last laugh. The populist revolution in Spain. Outrage over police violence during Catalonia's independence referendum. Is Spain heading for a breakup, and what does it mean for America? All that is next. Don't go away. The populist revolution seems to be growing around the world. This week, we saw dramatic scenes in Spain as Catalonia, one of the most prosperous parts of the country, which includes the city of Barcelona, held a referendum on independence. The national government in Madrid said it was illegal and tried to stop it with incredible brutality, sending in armed police, you can see there, amongst other atrocities, literally pulled voters out of polling places by their hair and left an old lady bleeding in the face. The King of Spain, I guess that qualifies as being a member of the elite, described the independence vote as, quote, inadmissible disloyalty. And just today, the Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, said, we are going to stop independence from happening. In my experience, lecturing people who want their own independence is not the best tactic, as we saw with Brexit. But what's going on here, and are there any lessons for us here in America? Chris, it seems to me that what you're seeing here is an uprising of people saying, oh, we don't want to be told what to do anymore.
Well, that's right. And we see this all over the place. I mean, to me, this is the biggest story right now that nobody is talking about. This is part and parcel of what we have seen with Donald Trump's election, with Brexit, even going back to the independence vote in Scotland. People are looking at their government and saying, there's got to be a better way. You know, the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century were the era of getting bigger. Maybe the 21st century is the era of getting smaller. People are looking for accountability, transparency, community, and I think this is just another evidence of that.
I know we don't have too much time. I just want to see if is that agenda, is that a policy agenda that you see actually happening from the Trump administration?
I think
more and more decentralized.
I think we are just at the beginning of. You talked about the next revolution. I think that is the next revolution. It is happening throughout the Western world. We're going to see more and more of it. It's going to become a more robust policy agenda.
Do you see it happening here?
I do, and we're actually seeing it with the Trump administration already with their efforts at deregulation and trying to make.
I agree with that, but I'm just,
yes. And I would add that
decentralization of power, pushing decisions down to
the states. Well, we're seeing that also.
And beyond the states.
Right. We're seeing that also with some of what the DOJ is doing in terms of civil rights enforcement, of saying we're going to kind of pull back on the centralization that we saw during the Obama administration. But I would like to add that, in fact, it was our founding fathers who had the wonderful insight that government closer to the people is better. Now, it doesn't mean it's not corrupt, as your monologue pointed out with the football teams getting these stadiums, but closer to the people makes it more answerable.
I agree with that. But, Krista, can the left get behind the notion of federalism and decentralization?
Thanks to Trump, is much more behind the idea of federalism and decentralization than ever before, because we see now in a visceral way the dangers of an authoritarian government. So in some areas, maybe deregulation, yes, but in others, you see President Trump wanting to sort of bludgeon cities and states in terms of their immigration enforcement, and rather than allowing local law enforcement to determine how best to keep their communities safe. So you do see an authoritarian impulse there, which, I think all of these uprisings around the world and all of why our politics is so real, it goes back to the conversation we had earlier about this massive transition that's happening in the economy, and people just are not sure what the future is going to look like, so it creates a lot of unsettling.
And they want to make their own decisions. And
politics.
I think, Chris, don't you think that we, those of us who believe in this, we've got to be intellectually consistent about it. And when the decentralization of power leads to decisions that we don't agree with, you have to say, well, that's the way it works.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we see this with so many of the Supreme Court decisions, right? I mean, there is a reason that the Constitution says any powers not specifically given to the federal government, they're delegated to the states and to the people. People want close government because it's more accountable, it's more transparent, it's more responsive to the actual needs, and that means you don't always get what you want.
I completely agree.
And we saw with the Obama administration that when he wasn't getting what he wanted legislatively, he said, "I've got a phone and a pen," and basically acting in an authoritarian manner.
And Donald Trump
We've got to go now, but I loved what you said, Chris. I hope it's the next revolution. People power, that's what we're all about on this show, and that's what I hope we see. But coming up next, we'll read some of your best social media responses to tonight's show. Don't go away.